Meet Bill Clement, a man dedicated to a simple but profound principle that unlimited success is available to everyone. It's a principle that has its roots in the sport of hockey.
Washington Capitals former flyer, Bill Clement.
2 All-Star games and 11 years in the NHL that began in Philadelphia. As a flyer, he learned of the tools a champion must develop: desire, perseverance, attitude, and teamwork. Okay, aggressiveness too. Hey, he had to survive. And survive he did for 11 years in the NHL, even with that hairdo. The reward? 2 Stanley Cups with the Flyers. Having won the top prize in one line of work, and having won it twice, Bill Clement entered another highly competitive field.
The rest of you men, grab your rifles. Let's do it!
No, it wasn't the real army, and he didn't really die, at least not literally. He competed and succeeded in an acting career and appeared in over 200 television commercials, as well as the soap opera All My Children. Hey, nice hair again. Not real glamorous, but broadcasting is. As with his other endeavors, Bill Clement applied his personal principles to TV sports and was recently named top sports analyst on cable television. Today, his passion is motivating people to understand we all have the potential to be the best. Bill Clement customizes and personalizes each presentation and recently addressed the Texas Motor Transportation Association. On this tape, you will see a 10-minute open which deals with challenges, goal setting, and adversity, followed by segments on personal philosophies, the power of attitude, and team building, which are graphically slated should you choose to fast forward. Here is Bill Clement.
But I tell you about being the best just to let you know that I know what it feels like to be here. Right down, right here, baby. And I know what it feels like to be here in the middle because I hit the middle on the way down or the way up, depending on which way I was going. And I know what it feels like to be here, to be the best. And I got to tell you, and I'm sure you all know, there's only one place that's worth aspiring to end up, and that's here. It's the best. I think it's human nature anyway. How many of you would like to be the best? Have your companies be deemed the best so that when people hear the name of your company, a little explosion goes off. Oh, yeah, they're the best. They're the best. How many would like to be the best, as individuals or with your companies? It's kind of a slam dunk. Some of your competition's sitting by you, and some of your bosses are sitting by you. Like somebody's going to go, no, I want to be 44th this year. I don't want to be the best. 44th would be fine this year. I think it's human nature to want to be the best, but you know that there's no path of least resistance to be the best. We all know that, especially in your industry. It's competitive. When you want to be the best, there are going to be challenges, aren't there? There are going to be challenges. That deregulation thing. Boy, I found out in a hurry. You want to strike up a conversation with somebody in the Texas trucking industry, just ask them where they stand on deregulation and then stand back. And the people that I spoke to tell me that it's going to happen. At least most people think it's going to happen. And deregulation is going to be a real test for a lot of people, some even to survive, some to adapt, some of the smaller companies to find a niche, or if they already have a niche, maybe to change the niche to something else. That's one of the challenges when you want to be the best. Deregulation is going to pose some real interesting challenges. The drivers. I was amazed to learn that the drivers and the shortage of drivers is one of the major problems in your industry. That as recently as 3 years ago, 75% of the drivers who were hired were experienced drivers and about 25% were inexperienced, and now that has switched over. Guys don't want to be on the road for 4 and 6 weeks, and there aren't as many in that age group demographic that everybody tries to hire. We want to be the best, and there are going to be challenges, and I know that there are goal setters sitting in the room here. We have to set goals, don't you? If you want to be the best, you have to set the goal, first of all, of being the best, and you set annual goals, and some of you set long-term goals. Well, I set goals as well. I started about 8 years ago. That's when I kind of got tuned into it. I didn't do it as a player, but I started 8 years ago. And I always like to visualize the path that I have to take to get from A to B. I'm great at doodling on paper. And I put this together. This was my perception at the time of the path that I had to take to reach my goal. and I hope everybody got their glasses on so you can see this at that end. I tested it and I thought it was visible. This isn't the way it looked originally. I think it was a doodle on a bar napkin or something originally. But this is the path I thought I would have to take to reach my goal. I mean, it takes effort and it takes time, and you can throw money down here with time, right? Time and money and effort. You need at least those variables to start from scratch and to track up and reach your goal. I thought that looks fair enough. That's what I got to put time, got to put effort, I'm going to have to put some money in at times. That's the path you have to take to reach your goal. About a year and a half after I put this together, I realized that wasn't even close. That was not even close to the path that people have to take to reach their goals. This is more what it looks like. This is reality. This is reality. I firmly believe that if you set a lofty enough goal, you end up farther from your goal before you end up closer to your goal. See this departure from the graph? It goes down. To me, this represents the unforeseen obstacle or difficulty or challenge or adversity that you hit or that hits you and it just blindsides you, knocks you down in the middle of your quest to reach your goal. It comes out of nowhere. It's the unforeseen adversity that creates a diminishing return in spite of your investment of time and money and effort. See, there's nothing in that goal-setting manual that would tell somebody that had perhaps set a goal of quitting smoking and losing 10 pounds. That's some personal goal that people quit. Somebody wants to lose some weight, quit smoking. There's nothing in the goal-setting manual that would tell you that there's going to be a serious illness in your family. And that's no time to quit smoking and lose weight. You end up gaining weight and smoking more. So you're farther from your goal before you're closer to your goal because of that unforeseen adversity that you've had to encounter. There's nothing in that goal-setting manual that tell the person that set a goal of having all of his kids' university money, college money put away by the time the kid was 7 years old, that he'd be out of work for a year, that the dad would be out of work for a year, and he'd spend not only the university money, but he'd spend all of his other savings as well, and he'd end up farther from his goal before he'd end up closer to his goal. Anybody that's in the room that hauls oil, how are they going to know if Russia starts to produce cheap crude that the price per barrel is going to be dropped $3 by OPEC and that domestic production is going to be driven offshore and then there's nothing else to haul? That would be an unforeseen bit of adversity that may create a diminishing return in spite of the investment of time and effort. You know something, the way I look at it, it could be worse. We all could be in the healthcare industry. Do you think these poor people realized 3 years ago that somebody named Bill and somebody named Hillary were going to have such a major impact on their lives? I don't think so. It's nice to know. Did you know that Bill Clinton's popularity is actually up? It's up in the last week. He is now somewhere between IRS agents and Jehovah's Witness. It's right up there. He's right up there. So this departure represents the unforeseen obstacle or challenge that you encounter that creates a diminishing return in spite of your investment of time and effort and in many cases money. And as you track along, you get to the red dot. You get right here. And you know what I call this? The red zone. I call it the red zone. How bad do you think I want you to remember the red zone? 43-year-old grown man walking around. Well, I do feel kind of religious when I'm in here, I must admit that. The red zone. The red zone is the point at which the weight of the adversity becomes so great that those of us who are not prepared and equipped to reach our goal of being the best, we begin to resign ourselves to defeat. We resign ourselves to finishing second, or worse, we resign ourselves to finishing last, or worse, we quit. Or worse, we quit. It's the make or break point on the way from point A to point B being the goal. It's also a football term, isn't it? From the 20-yard line in. It's the toughest place on the football field to move the ball through. You don't get a touchdown if you don't move the ball through the red zone, and there's not one team in the NFL that does it with any regularity at all. Not one team. You can see you're heading back up, though. Look at the graph and see how it's actually heading back up towards the goal. But finally you get trapped in the red zone. and you're finally overcome with the weight of the doubt and the distraction and the fatigue and the frustration and the number one enemy of all goal setting, fear. Fear of failure, fear of the unknown, fear of change, fear of criticism, fear of rejection, and you quit. I know there are no quitters in this room. I know that, but I also know that we all go through red zones. And it's uncomfortable to be in the red zones. When that weight gets so great on top of you and you're wondering if you're going to survive, you're wondering if you're going to make it, it's uncomfortable. Hopefully you have the weapons and the tools to take the red zone and say, get off of me. I'm not going to let you stop me. I'm coming through. Get out of my way. I had a hockey flashback there for a second. Sorry about that. You can just keep it till later. I really believe we all go through red zones. Personally, in business, we all go through red zones. Hitting home runs is easy when somebody's pitching nice, big, slow, straight baseballs across the middle of the plate. And scoring goals in hockey is real easy when nobody's banging on you with a hockey stick when you're trying to score. But that's not what life is all about. When you want to be the best, the competition gets tougher. It's how we react in the red zones, in the times of adversity, that really determines who is going to be the best. And what I'd like to do for the next few minutes is just chat about some of the tools and some of the weapons that are available to us to help us fight through the red zones and to track all the way up and reach our goals. The first one I want to talk about involves what is unique about each of your companies. Is it the service you provide that is unique? Probably not. I mean, people in the trucking industry and the support people, they all have competition. I mean, there's not a company that really performs a unique function. Truckers move stuff from point A to point B. Is it the equipment? I don't think so. You know what's unique about your companies? It's you. And you, and you, and you, all of you as individuals, and your identities. Identities. You know who has a problem with identities? Ex-pro athletes. They retire from the sport and they're still 35, 45, 55 years old. They're still catching that touchdown pass in the bar, showing the boys how they used to do it. They take a broom out and they're scoring a goal at the bar, or they're at home showing their kids. They can't leave it in the past. I've always felt you got to move forward. But athletes have such a problem with their identities because they keep living in the past. Don't you agree you got to look forward? Honestly, the guys that look in the past, I've never understood it. I don't get it. Okay, every once in a while I like to show my kid a video of when I played. Identity. Identity. What is your identity? Your identity really is who you are and what you stand for. What you stand for. And you know what's really interesting? Most people know more about what we stand against than what we stand for. It's true. More know what we stand against than what we stand for. I ask executives all over the country if they have a personal philosophy, and they start telling me that they have a corporate philosophy or a mission statement, and most people do. I also find out that the majority of people know something about other people's personal philosophies. You walk into a lot of offices and you'll see an inscription on the desk or a plaque on the wall, maybe something from Abraham Lincoln or Vince Lombardi or Eleanor Roosevelt or Thomas Edison's genius is 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. You only have to worry when you walk into your accountant's office and he's got that on the wall, but it reads, genius is 20% inspiration and 90% perspiration. You better check your accountant at that point. So we know something about other people's, but very few people have a personal philosophy. Picture for a second sitting in your office and seeing on your desk or hanging on the wall your words, professionally framed or engraved, just hanging there for you to see and the rest of the world to see. What do you think you'd be looking at? To me, you'd be looking at the essence of who you are and what you stand for. You'd be looking at the granite foundation upon which everything else in your life should probably rest. You'd be looking, to me, at one of the tools that helps you through the red zone times, those times of adversity when you need strength. I told you about moving to New York from Atlanta when I was pursuing my acting career and how poor we were. That $4,000, remember that I had on the steel box in the attic? I'd built that up to $8,000. But we were poor because our overhead was $3,300 a month at the time. I had a ledger book that I sat there and I had it all budgeted out, and from rent, which was $1,200 a month for a little 2-bedroom box, and a car payment and a child support payment and all kinds of other little things, but it was bare bones budget. It was $3,300 a month to survive. We had $8,000 in the steel box. It wasn't in the attic anymore. It was in a bank account by this time. So that gave us 2.5 months to make it, but we had no jobs lined up when we first got there, no agents lined up to send us out on auditions, so we had no income coming in. We moved cold. And I remember sitting at my desk in the office, which was my desk beside the stove in the kitchen. There was no office. It was way too small for an office. And I would sit there looking at this ledger book, and damn, wasn't I in a red zone again? And sweat would start to drip off my nose because I said to myself, we got 2.5 months to make it. That's a pretty short fuse. How the hell are we going to do this? And one thing that helped me was being able to look up there beside the stove and seeing my personal philosophy hang there. I want to share it with you just to show you what I'm talking about. I just call this my commitment. And it's a 6-point deal. I think I wanted to be ready for all of the red zones at the same time. So I just put 6 points together. And I'll tell you when I put this together. The first Christmas after I filed personal bankruptcy, I remember getting ready, in my mind at least, to go out and buy Christmas gifts for the people that I loved. My parents and my brother and my sister. And realizing that I didn't have enough money to do that. That was when I said to myself, you'd better get in touch, big guy, with who you are and what you stand for to see if you got what it takes to make it. That was another time that I was really down. And that's when I created this. And I've revised it since then. You can revise it depending on what goes on in your life. But I simply call this my commitment, and it's 6 points. And it starts, I will be honest and sincere with my audience and listeners. I will not allow my ego or my temper to overrule my head in a decision. I'm a leader. My positive attitude during difficult times will reflect this. If my attitude slips, I'm a role model for no one. I will try to be gentle, objective, and fair with Sissy and the kids. Sissy's my wife. Sometimes this is the hardest one to stick to. You fight the business battles all day long, and you go home and you remember you got to be a leader there too, and you got to be gentle, objective, and fair there as well. When someone engages my services, I will always give them more than they pay for. And the last one, which is the most important one for me, I'm not the toughest guy in the world, but I will never quit. If there's a cynic in the audience, he or she probably thinks I'm selling frames at the back of the room. I'm not going to be selling frames. But when you design a personal philosophy, you set your own standards. Nobody else sets them for you. You make a commitment about quality to yourself. And something like that has to involve quality, doesn't it? Honesty, trust, perseverance, courage, work ethic. And you can make it as long or as short as you want, but you have to be proud of it. If you're not proud of it, it means you just haven't dug deep down inside of you deep enough to get the qualities up that you know are there. You'd be amazed how easy it is to defer to that thing when you see it hanging on the wall. You'd be amazed. You know why? Those aren't Abraham Lincoln's words. Those are yours. So there's instant accountability. Instant accountability. And it pushes us towards a very valuable process that a lot of us neglect. We're running around so fast on a day-to-day basis, and when things don't go right, it's so easy to blame the legislators, or blame the drivers, or blame the weather, or the economy, or the kids, or the dog, or your wife, or your husband, when in reality in life, there is a truth. And the truth is, there is only one thing in this world over which you have complete control, and it's you. So it pushes you to self-examination. With a well-thought-out personal philosophy, when you put it on your wall and people come in, they'll see it there. And you know what? It's embarrassing at first, because that's part of your soul that's hanging there for people to see. But it's part of your soul that you got to get in touch with, and get in touch with fast when you think you may be on the way down and you're fighting for survival. And people that see it go through a transformation. After a while, they start to perceive you as somebody with great credibility and great stability. They'll say things like, boy, he's really got it together. Look at that. That's his own personal philosophy. And most important, you're all leaders in this room. In some capacity, you're all leaders. You let people know who you are and what you stand for. And you'll be perceived as somebody with great inner strength. You are what is unique to your companies. With a strong personal philosophy, you let people know who you are and what you stand for. And that will help you as leaders. Tool number 2, besides the personal philosophy. Attitude. Something we talk to our kids about all the time. Bad attitude, right? Attitude this, attitude that. We spend more of our time talking about our kids' attitudes than we worry about our own attitudes. And you know it's going to be tested. You know your attitudes are going to be tested. That truck that's gone from California to Texas with no problem at all is back in California. Now it's heading up to Washington. It's got to go through Oregon to get to Washington, and it appears that Oregon didn't buy into this IFTA thing, this International Fuel Tax Agreement. Truck isn't registered in Oregon. All of a sudden the driver gets bogged down. Well, you or somebody in your company's got to get some money to him, and everything's held up. It's just another headache in the middle of the day, just another attitude tester. That's one. Maybe a safety director comes in and tells you that one of your drivers has been falsifying logs. No, that doesn't happen, does it? Okay, once in a while. Well, the safety director wants the driver fired right away. But you know that you got a shortage of drivers, so you want to rehabilitate. I mean, that's choice number 1 for you. Safety director is so gung-ho that demands that this person be fired and throws the paperwork and goes ballistic on you, and all of a sudden, instead of having one person that should be fired, you got 2 people that should be fired. Your head's in a vice. Ugh. Caught again in the middle of the day with just another problem that you've got to take care of. Another attitude tester for you. A lot of the people in operations I've learned in the trucking industry work such horrendous hours. I mean, that's a strain on attitude as well. Sometimes salespeople, if the companies are big enough, will go out and sell some business and the operations can't back it up. There aren't enough drivers, maybe there aren't enough trucks, they just can't get the job done. And it would test my attitude on a day-to-day basis just knowing that trucks represent less than 3% of all the registered vehicles on Texas highways and pay almost 30% of state and federal highway user taxes. Seems fair to me. So there are always going to be testers like that. Always testers. And its attitude is so important because it molds our perception of situations. It really determines how we perceive situations. I'll give you an example. Company, big manufacturing company of shoes in the U.S. decides that it wants to drum up some business in the outback of Australia with the Aborigines, with the natives in Australia. So this shoe company sends a couple of reps to the outback, to different parts. Sometime later, the company gets telegrams back from each sales rep. The first one reads, no business here, natives don't wear shoes. Second one reads, great opportunity here, natives don't wear shoes. Our attitude molds our perception of different situations. It really does. Great attitude story about the guy that goes to the track and he puts down a $2 bet on the long shot. Thing wins, pays big dough. Race number 2, takes all the money, puts it on the long shot, wins again. 3rd race, 4th race, he keeps doing the same thing. He keeps loading up on the long shot. Second last race, he does it, it wins. The guy's got $800,000. Last race comes. What's he do? He rolls it on the long shot on the last race. Well, folks, that horse is still running. Finished dead last. He lost it all. He walked home, walked into the house. His wife said, well, dear, how'd you do at the track? He said, not bad, I lost $2. Now that's a great attitude. That is a great attitude. The example of the worst attitude was the old Saturday Night Live skit, The Whiners. But I don't want $800,000. They whined and they whined and they whined. When people ask me how I am in the morning, you know what I tell them? Terrific. Great. 2 mornings out of 3, I am lying through my teeth. The reason I tell them that is that sooner or later, I start feeling great if I say it. You've heard of autosuggestion maybe, or cybernetic loops. Those are just great big terms that are trying to tell you that you have a choice. You can feel any way you want because you're the only thing in this world over which you have complete control. You ever met anybody that had a bad attitude that anybody wanted to hang around? We had a guy that played for us in Atlanta. Gosh, I hope nobody's related to him, because the story I'm about to tell isn't that flattering. His name was Gary McAdam. We nicknamed him Too Bad. Too Bad McAdam. McAdam was too long. We were all hockey players. We shortened McAdam to McCads, so it became Too Bad McCads, and then Too Bad became TB, so it was TB McCads. I'll tell you why we called him Too Bad. He came to us from the Detroit Red Wings organization. He always had a sob story about something. Detroit didn't understand me. They didn't let me play on the power play. I was the fastest skater on the team, you know. They should have played me more. I never realized my potential there. It was their fault. Well, he came to us, and he had the same story about the Atlanta Flames. I should be on the power play here. I'm the fastest skater. I had a fight with my girlfriend today. My dog bit me. One story after the other. When we used to play a game, when we go into a bar or getting on a plane, anywhere where we had to sort of sit beside one another, we'd leave one seat open beside TB to see who ended up having to sit beside him. And we knew that all the person sitting beside him would end up doing would be sitting there going, "That's too bad." "Yeah, that's too bad." "Geez, that's too bad." And that's why we named him Too Bad McCads. Anytime I think of TB McCads, it reminds me that life is a smorgasbord. And every day, thousands of people sit around the table and starve to death. Sit around the table and starve to death. I came across a great attitude story last summer. My sister-in-law lives in Columbus, Georgia, and she runs the Miss Georgia pageant office, which is just a tiny little cubicle office with one desk and one phone. Her name's Linda Brewer. And one day, her regional director, a man named Parks Rice, he called her, and Linda didn't seem like herself. He said, "What's wrong?" She said, "Oh, nothing, nothing." He said, "No, come on, what's wrong?" She said, "Nothing." Parks Rice hung up. 5 minutes later, the state director, Mansfield Bias, better known as Snooky, that's his nickname, he called and said, "Linda, what's bothering you?" She said, "Nothing." He said, "Come on, you got to tell me." She said, "Okay, I'll tell you what's bothering me." She said, "The phone rings all day long here. I can't get my work done. I want to do good work for you." And he said, "Don't you know why the phone rings so often?" She said, "No." He said, "We used to get 7 calls a week into this office. Now we get 16 calls a day because the franchises from around the state feel terrific after they've spoken to you. You're so up, you're so bubbly, you're so positive, you're so helpful. They feel terrific, especially if they're having a bad day." She had become a clearinghouse for positive energy, working out of this tiny little cubicle over the damn phone. And when she went to the Miss Georgia pageant in Atlantic City, everybody was rushing up to try to find Linda. "Where's Linda Brewer? I want to meet Linda. I want to meet Linda." She had influenced people's states of mind just with her attitude, just over the phone. She had induced a positive attitude in countless number of people just with her attitude. I'll show you how powerful attitude is. Let's take one word, the word that we answer the phone with generally, which is hello. But do we say hello, or do we say hello? Where's the inflection? Ask yourself how you do it. Is it up at the end, or is it down at the end? What are you saying when you say hello? You're saying, "I'm busy. I know what you got to say isn't going to be that important. I don't have time for this right now. Get on with it. I'm not going to pay a lot for that muffler." What are you saying to somebody when you say, "Hello"? Listen how much more receptive it is. You're saying, "Sure, I'm going to talk to you. I have time. I know what you're going to say is important, and I'll give you as much as you want for that muffler." And the reason that attitude is so powerful is we are creatures that mirror one another. As humans, we mirror people. Psychologists proved this years ago when they set up cameras at checkout counters in supermarkets, and they instructed the cashiers to have different attitudes. Want you to be happy, want you to be sad, want you to be angry, want you to be abrasive. And invariably, the people coming through the line mirrored the people that were being the cashiers and that were displaying the different attitudes. We mirror people. And you as leaders have to set that attitude so that everybody in your organization has the same attitude. You know why? Because everybody, from your office to the drivers, to mechanics, to janitors, to it doesn't matter. You're all carrying the company flag. You're all carrying the company flag. Lucy Nygren didn't realize she was carrying the flag. Lucy Nygren worked at a little Federal Express kiosk in the middle of a parking lot in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. And one day a regular customer of hers drove through, and while he was sitting there doing business, he said, "Lucy, do you know what PSP is?" And she said, "Well, yes, that's people, service, profit. It's part of our corporate philosophy." Man drove away. A week later he came back and he was doing business again. He said, "Lucy, how do you measure your failures if you don't deliver something you're supposed to deliver on time?" And she said, "Well, we have a weighted system, and it's on a scale of 1 to 11, and depending on the degree of inconvenience that we caused the person that was supposed to get the shipment, we put it in that category from 1 to 11. It's called our QSI, our Quality Service Indicator." The man drove away, and he came back a week later, and this time he said to her, "Lucy, do you know what the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award is?" And Lucy said, "Well, yes, Mr. Baldrige was a Secretary of Commerce in the Reagan administration. He's since passed away, but they've named this award after him, and it's the highest award for quality that you can get nationally." And the man drove away, and he didn't come back again for a long time. 60 days after he asked that last question, Federal Express won the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award. And what Lucy Nygren hadn't realized was that man that asked all the questions was one of the men that had been asked to judge the finalists in the Baldrige Award. And after the award ceremonies in Washington, the man that had been the judge and that had asked all the questions, he approached the FedEx executives and he said, "I just want you to know why I lobbied so hard for you folks to win this award, why I lobbied behind closed doors." He said, "I felt that if one woman working alone in the middle of a parking lot in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, knew that much about quality and about service, you deserve to win the Baldrige Award." You're all leaders. That's why we're talking about this. You are the tone setters in your organizations. Nobody can make you feel down without your consent. Attitude comes from within. It doesn't come from without. And you own it outright. You own it outright. With a terrific attitude, other people will be able to feed off of it. And you know that from here to here to here to here, they will all carry your flag proudly. Now, I couldn't, in all good conscience, stand here and not talk about team. Team has been my life. And I know we got all kinds of teams here, from Ace Transportation to Acme Trucking to Barber to Chemlime to FFE to Hendrickson and Galaxy and the Texas Truck Insurance Agency and Venture and Fruhoff and Peterbilt and Mack and more and more and more. So everybody here is on different teams. But at the same time, you're all sitting in this room and you're part of the TMTA team, aren't you? So that's another team that you're on. You're also members of the smallest team, which I think is also the most important team, and that is the team of family. Families need leadership as well, and that's a very, very important team. Team is so important. It's paramount not only in sports, we know that. It's so important in business, we know that. It's important in life in general. It may even be important in the life after. There's a story about a man who died and fortunately gained access to heaven, but on his way through the pearly gates and talking to St. Peter, he said, "I'm curious, St. Peter, could you show me what hell looks like?" And St. Peter said, "Yes, I will show you." So they walked through a door into a big room, and in the middle of this room was a big pot of stew. And around the pot of stew sat a whole bunch of people, and they were all starving. All starving, but they all had spoons that were long enough to reach the pot of stew. But the spoons were so long that when they brought the handles up, they couldn't get the tip of the spoon to their mouths. And they were starving. And the suffering was terrible. And St. Peter said, "Come, now I will show you heaven." So they left that room, they walked into another room, and it looked to the man identical to the first room. Big pot of stew in the middle, bunch of people sitting around. They all had long spoons that could reach the pot but were too long to reach their mouths, but everybody was nourished. Everybody was happy. Man said, "I don't understand. Everything's the same in this room. The stew, the people, the spoons. I don't get it." St. Peter smiled and looked at him and said, "Here the people have learned to feed each other." That's a great story, and it's fictional, obviously, because nobody knows what it's like to go to heaven. I always wanted a real, true-life example of what would happen if there wasn't any team. We all know what can be accomplished with teams. We see franchises in sports and we see businesses and teamwork. You know what can be accomplished with team. But what would happen if there was a complete absence of team? I never thought I would find out, but thanks to my wife and anthropology, believe it or not, I kind of found out. She took an anthropology course a couple of years ago, and she came home and she started telling me this story about the Ik. The Ik. I-K. This was a large tribe that lived in northern Uganda in Africa. And they were hunters and gatherers. But they weren't nomadic. They didn't move around. So after a while, after many years, they killed off all of the wildlife in their area. And they had to become horticulturalists to survive. They had to start growing stuff. And something happened during the adaptation from hunters to horticulturalists that anthropologists can't explain. This tribe stopped socializing. Stopped socializing with other tribes, stopped socializing with one another. They became a tribe of loners. They worked alone, they ate alone, they hunted alone. They did everything for self. They showed no emotion and no affection. If somebody found food and other people were starving, even if it was their mate or their children, they would not share until they were completely satisfied, having eaten as much as they could. They never played with the children. They never showed any affection to the kids. The only time they ever held a kid was to nurse the kid. And at age 3, the Ik would push their 3-year-olds out of the hut door and force them to survive on their own, to gather food and to hunt and exist on their own. By the mid-60s, this once large, thriving tribe had been reduced to a handful of survivors. And if you look for any trace of the Ik today, you won't find it. They are gone. They are extinct. When I tell that story, that part about the 3-year-old still sends shivers down my neck. I got a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old, and to think of these 3-year-olds being shoved out the door. But what a terrific example of what the ultimate is when there is a complete breakdown of teamwork. I want to share a secret with everybody. You don't need the best personnel to be a champion. You don't need the best personnel to have the best team. I learned this in Philadelphia when we won our first Stanley Cup. We played against the Boston Bruins. The Boston Bruins had Phil Esposito and Bobby Orr and Jerry Cheevers, and the list was long, and Johnny Busick, and they have Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer. And we won the Stanley Cup. They didn't win the Stanley Cup. The reason we won the Stanley Cup is that the relationships between the people on our team were stronger. You don't need the best personnel, you need the strongest relationships to have the best team. So what is the beginning of forming strong relationships on your team? We had the #1 commodity that every team has to have to be a champion. We had leadership. I defy anybody to tell me the name of a sports team that ever won a championship without terrific leadership, somebody leading the way. We had a guy named Bobby Clark, 5 foot 10 inch, 185-pound whirling dervish from Flin Flon, Manitoba, and he was a classic leader. He had guts, and he stood up for what he knew was right, and he played like a maniac. And we had 6 other guys that went on to be captains with other teams, and I was one of them. So you don't need the best personnel, you have to have the strongest relationships. And the most important thing that you have to have is leadership to make those relationships strong. But what's the most important thing a leader must do to make the relationship strong? He's got to make everybody on the team, from the guys that get 40 minutes of ice time to the guys that get 2 minutes, feel important. He's got to make them feel that they are important and that their contributions are tremendously important to the team. I think we all want that. As kids or as moms or as dads or as employees or whatever. We all need that. It's a human need. It's almost like eating and drinking. We need to feel important. People in this room, not as much as some of the people that work for you, because most of the people in this room are terrific self-starters. And you can make it through a lot of difficult times yourselves. But your leaders and the people that follow you have to feel important. They have to feel important. Nobody wants to feel like the guy that went to the dentist one day and said, "Doc, I don't know what to do. I got really yellow teeth." And the dentist looked at him and said, "Wear a brown tie." Didn't make him feel very important. Here is the whole key. If you feel important, you work important. If you feel important, you play important. If you feel important, you work with pride and perseverance and enthusiasm. Dwight Eisenhower used to use a terrific example of leadership. He'd take a piece of string and he'd put it on a table and he'd say, "See, when you pull it, it will follow you wherever you go. But when you push it, it will go nowhere at all." It's just that way when you're talking about leadership. It's just that way. So how do you make your people feel important? How do you make them feel important? Brace yourselves for this. This is pretty heady stuff. I don't want any information overload. How do you make people feel important? You tell them. You are important. You are a very important part of our organization. And you'd be amazed at how many people assume that they do that don't really do it. I talk to many, many people in upper management. I say, "Do you tell your people that they are important? Do you actually say you are important?" They say, "Oh, yeah. Now, so we're pretty busy most of the time because we've got a company to run, but yeah, they know they're important." And I go to the other people that are perhaps down the corporate ladder a little bit, and I say, "Do you feel important?" And most of the time I get, "Well, yeah, sort of, kind of, maybe. Nobody really tells me that I am." I think sometimes we get hustling and bustling around doing our day-to-day things. We forget about some of these things that we have to do as leaders. Sometimes we fit the description the Japanese have of American marketing. You know what the Japanese definition is of American marketing, their perception of it? Ready, fire, aim. And sometimes we get going that fast that we forget to aim before we fire. So how do you make them feel important? You tell them. And no, don't assume that they know. Don't assume that they know. You get into trouble when you assume. You get into trouble when you assume. Like the guy that was a photographer for a magazine and he wanted to get some shots of the big western fires that are happening. So he hired a private plane and he rushed to the airport. There was a private plane warming up at the gate. He jumped on. He said to the pilot, "Take off." The pilot swung her into the wind. In about 3 minutes, they were over the fires. And the photographer said to the pilot, he said, "All right, take it down really low and swoop there about 3 or 4 times. Make 3 or 4 passes." The pilot looked at him and said, "Why?" The photographer said, "Well, I'm a photographer. I mean, photographers take pictures. That's what I'm here to do." And the pilot looked at him and said, "You mean you're not the flight instructor?" A slight problem because of that assumption. He missed the boat, that person, that photographer. Just like the coach that I had in Atlanta that I know Hampton remembers, and Hampton probably saw him on TV broadcasting. His name was Boom Boom Jeffreyon. His real name was Bernard, but his nickname was Boom Boom Jeffreyon. He got his nickname because he invented the slap shot in hockey, the big wind-up and slapping the puck, and that was in the 50s. And when the puck hit the end of the boards at the Montreal Forum, it went boom, boom. And somebody creatively nicknamed him Boom Boom. Boom Boom didn't really like me very much because I used to call him Bang Bang all the time. He didn't really like that. Boom Boom was a charismatic guy with a tremendous voice and a wonderful singing voice. He had performed on television before, and he was our coach, and he never quite mastered the English language, especially the plurals. There'd be 15 of us sitting there, and he'd say, "I love you, Guy." I want to guarantee one thing, I love you, Guy, because you're the Atlanta Flame. Atlanta was Klana, K-L-A-N-N-A, and it was the Flame. It wasn't the Flames. I love you, Guy, because you're the Atlanta Flame. We knew we were in trouble when Boom Boom used to walk into the room before the game to start his pep talk, and he'd say, "Hey, we're going to win if we do 3 things, skate and shoot." Pace up and down. One night, we were playing in Boston, and this was the same big, bad Boston Bruins team that we had defeated in Philadelphia for the Stanley Cup that still had Orr and Esposito. And it just so happened that year the Boston farm team also played in Boston. They were called the Boston Braves of the American League. Boston Bruins of the NHL were the parent team. And this particular game, there were a couple of guys injured on the Bruins team, but they were not the marquee name players. A couple of guys way down the ladder. I mean, I can't even remember who they were. But they called up a couple of guys from the Boston Braves. So Boom Boom comes in, and Boom 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 wants to make us think that the team is decimated with injuries and that the Boston Bruins have been reduced to a farm team that we get to play against that night. So he comes walking in. Hey, I love you, guy. You're Clement Flame. Treat things, skate and shoot when you were in trouble right away. Hey, who they got those guy over there? That's not the Boston Bruin. That's the Boston Brave. I want to guarantee you one thing. I would not trade any one of you guy for any one of those guy over there. Maybe one or two guy. So he couldn't leave us. He couldn't leave us up here. He had to somehow drag us back down. So how do you make people feel important? You tell them. How else do you make people feel important? You congratulate them and compliment them. The 2 C's. Way to go. Nice work. You did a great job. Gee, you don't sweat much for a fat guy. Whatever you have to tell them. You congratulate them and compliment them. You know, we assume that quarterbacks in football are leaders because they're in that position of quarterback, but some of them aren't as good leaders as other guys. I remember last football season when it started, I was watching a game on day 1. It was the Miami Dolphins playing in Indianapolis, and it was a scoreless tie right up until the last 2 minutes of the game. 2 minutes to go, Dan Marino marched his team down the field, and with less than a minute to go, scored a touchdown. And they ultimately won the game. But when Marino scored the touchdown, he ran to the sidelines, and you know, quarterbacks very often will just stand there by the coach, and after they've done something good, the guys will come up and give them the obligatory pat on the butt and stuff like that. Well, Dan Marino started going around congratulating people, and after a couple, I started to count. He snaked his way up the sidelines, and then he went behind to the bench, and he was grabbing people off the bench and hugging them and saying, way to go, guys, way to go. These are guys that hadn't even been in the damn game, and probably weren't going to get in the game all year. He congratulated 26 teammates. 26. Imagine how important those people that hadn't even gotten into the game, that their leader was coming saying, way to go, you're a part of that, way to go, nice job, way to go. Dan Marino is a leader. He is a leader. How else do you make people feel important? Maybe wish them happy birthday. Very serious. People that work for you, it takes little things, but you can't pay lip service to it. I worked for a large company for 5 years. First year I worked for them, I walked through the reception area on my birthday, and there was this can of exotic nuts with nice wrapping and a nice bow and a card on it that said, happy birthday, Bill, from your blank family. I'll leave the name of the company out, from your blank family. I said, that's pretty nice. Second year I worked for them, my birthday, I walked in, another can of exotic nuts. Wrapping was the same, bow was the same, card, happy birthday, Bill, from your blank family. Third year, same thing. Same box of nuts there with the fancy wrapping and the card that said, happy birthday, Bill, from your blank family. And I realized that I was nothing more than a card that a computer spit out on December 19th that said, December 20th, Bill Clement birthday, send nuts. You know, the president of that company had an office right in amongst the 30 most important people around him. And I figured if he took 2 minutes for each person to walk out of his office and to walk into their office and say, I just wanted to wish you happy birthday. You're important to us, and I want you to know that, so happy birthday. Walk back to his office. 2 minutes per person times 30, 60 minutes. 1 hour out of the entire year to help his people feel important so that they would work important and work with pride and work with perseverance. Know what else you can do? You can ask people for their opinions. That makes people feel important. What do you think I should do with this situation? What's your opinion of this? You got any ideas on this? You might get a good idea for one thing, and you encourage people to think. You encourage people to think, not like the 2 guys that a farmer observed one day. He was sitting on his front porch and this highway department truck pulled up across the way. One guy got out of the truck and walked into the ditch and dug this sizable hole in the ground. Got back into the truck. 10 minutes later, a guy got out of the other side of the truck, went over to the hole, pushed all the ground in, tamped it down. They got back in the truck, they moved 50 feet down the road in the ditch, repeated the process. Guy dug the hole, got back in. 10 minutes later, a guy came out, filled it back in, tamped it down. They did 5 like that. They were on their way to their 6th hole. Farmer said, I can't take it anymore. Farmer walked over to the guys and said, "Excuse me, could you tell me what it is y'all are doing here?" And one guy said, "No, sir, I'll tell you. We're on a highway beautification project, and the boy that plants the trees is homesick today." So you encourage your folks to think. Well, some of the people saw me come in with this. I don't think everybody did. Even if you're not a hockey fan, you got to know this is a hockey stick, right? Or this is a hockey stick for midgets. This is a special edition Wayne Gretzky stick. Wayne's name is right here. It's a one-of-a-kind stick. Easton makes them especially for him. And I thought it would be appropriate to bring a Gretzky stick because Gretzky delivers just like Texas Trucking delivers. Let's examine the properties of these two things. This is big, right? This is smaller. This is shiny. This isn't very shiny. This is aluminum. Most of this is just wood. This can conduct electricity. Not a chance. You can't burn this. Anybody want some kindling? Can burn this. You can defend yourself with this if you have to. Unless you know how to throw a boomerang, this one ain't going to work. Cost of this, $170. Cost of this, $16.95. To me, sometimes I think that this represents presidents, CEOs, district managers, vice presidents, people that make very good salaries, the best salaries in the companies, the people who are perceived by the public at large to be the most important people in the company and in the organization. And this represents the people that don't make as much money, clerks, secretaries, drivers, janitors, the people that sometimes think that they're not very important and that it's only a job. The people who are perceived by the public at large to be less important than these people. But the truth is, without these people, these guys don't got nothing. They don't. Better get that. Bo knows, but Wayne has ways of finding out. Let me show you how this thing goes together. Usually there's glue on here. I took it off so I could get this together without a torch. There's glue on the outside of this. Players take torches, they stand outside the locker room and they heat up the hosel, this part of the shaft of the stick, and it gets hot enough that when they press this into it like this, the glue melts and then it solidifies and holds it together. The glue is what you as leaders have to provide to take these two things of drastically different properties, drastically different functions, and pull them together to create a formidable tool, a formidable weapon, a formidable team. You know what's interesting about these things? You know where they break? 98% of the time when you break an aluminum shafted hockey stick, they break right here. Right where the glue is. This is a crucial point in a hockey stick, and it's the crucial point on your team where the glue is. If you make your people feel important, I will guarantee you they will work important. And don't ever underestimate your abilities to motivate people, because it only takes little things to motivate people, to do special things. And at the end of the day, you can say to yourself, who did I inspire today? Or maybe even, how many people did I inspire today? And you'll have a terrific team, and you'll be able to move through the red zones and become the best, and become the best. Teamwork is easy as long as you provide the glue. It's not quite as easy as the guy thought one day when he was sitting at his campsite and saw a big RV pull in at the campsite next to him. 4 kids bound out of the door and set up the tent. When that was finished, 2 of them took off into the woods to get firewood. 2 other kids started helping the mom set up for lunch. The dad stood there and was watching everything happen, and the man at the other campsite was watching it all, and he said, "This is the best example of teamwork I've ever seen." He said, "I got to go and tell him." So he walked over to the father who was standing there watching everybody work. He said, "Excuse me, sir, I must tell you, this is the greatest example of teamwork I've ever seen." And the man said, "Yeah, that's my system. Nobody goes to the bathroom until camp's set up." So if all else fails, don't let your employees go to the bathroom until their work is done. When you leave this terrific establishment, and I think everybody has to agree that it's a wonderful hotel, when you leave here, please do me a favor and think about being the best. Remember the red zones that you're going to hit, the times of adversity, the challenges of survival. And remember the tools that are available to you. The personal philosophy, letting people know who you are and what you stand for. Your identity, to give you strength to move through the difficult times. Remember the power of attitude, the power to influence other people's states of mind simply with your attitude. And remember, team, if you make the glue strong by making your people feel important, they will do important work. I'd like to leave you with a legend about a time in the history of humanity when mankind so abused wisdom that the wise men decided to take it away from mankind and hide it where they could never again find it. But the big question was, where were they going to hide it? So a council of the wise men was quickly convened, and one of the younger wise men spoke up and said, "I know where we will hide it. We will hide the key to happiness and success atop the highest mountain, because mankind will never learn to climb that high." And the senior wise men said, "No, mankind will learn to climb that high." And another young wise man said, "I know, we will dig a hole in the ground so deep and bury it there, and mankind will never be able to dig that deep." And the senior wise men said, "No, mankind will dig that deep and will take the key to happiness and success back." And another young wise man said, "I know, we will sink it into the darkest depths of the deepest ocean. Mankind will never dive that deep." And the senior wise man said, "No, mankind will dive that deep. Here is where we will hide the key to happiness and success. We will hide it deep inside every individual, because they'll never think to look for it there." As humans, we are not at our best perched at the summit. We are climbers at our best when the way is steep. The way will be steep for some of you in the near future, but there is no doubt in my mind that you will all end up perched at the summit. God bless you all, and thank you very much.